Hey, I'm glad you're here. If you're like me, you do a fantasy football draft. One of the problems you have is there are too many players that you want on your team. You can't have them all. Chris, I know you feel that way, especially when it comes to wide receivers.
Yes, definitely. And especially now that we do so much in the fantasy football space and we dive into pretty much every single player, I find myself finding reasons to like almost every single wide receiver I come across, except maybe Gabe Davis.
There are always exceptions. All right. Well, you know what? We're going to talk about some must-have wide receivers. There are 6 that Chris and I definitely agree you've got to try to get them in your draft. But then we're going to go over 4 that we don't see eye to eye on, and we'll tell you why each of us think they're must-haves. All right, let's kick it off in round 1. Guy who actually is managing to rise in ADP despite being a first rounder all offseason is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, this guy seems to have both the floor and the ceiling.
Yes, we saw that last year, a very high floor with a very high ceiling, and I think we see an even higher ceiling this year. I've talked about it on multiple videos this offseason. I truly think Amon-Ra St. Brown can make that leap to be the overall wide receiver 1. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of those guys I am trying to get, if at all possible, in the first round.
Yeah, there's nothing like feeling of the safety of a player you know is going to produce every single week. All right, now, we both agree on this player, and it seems crazy that we even have to talk about Justin Jefferson as a must-have, but some people are now scared to draft him because of the quarterback situation. You're not scared, though.
I am not scared. We saw last year, even with Nick Mullins, this guy was great. Look, Sam Darnold is at least serviceable, good enough for Justin Jefferson. And look, if Sam Darnold struggles or gets hurt, Nick Mullins will be the guy. And we saw last year it's okay with Justin Jefferson. And I've had people in our Discord say they've gotten Justin Jefferson now with pick 7, pick 10. I mean, people are very scared. So like you said, it's crazy that we have to even say it. But Justin Jefferson is still a must-draft wide receiver.
Yeah, for him to drop it all, it just seems like a big overreaction, as if we just assumed J.J. McCarthy was going to be a stud in his rookie season. Come on, Sam Darnold isn't the worst quarterback out there, and I think J.J. is pretty much quarterback-proof. All right, and then staying in the first round, sometimes you can get Garrett Wilson even in the second round. I've said I think he's a player who, if there's a dark horse to be the wide receiver 1, it might be him. I mean, you think he's definitely worth his draft stock, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the talent is there for Garrett Wilson. It just comes down to Aaron Rodgers really just staying healthy. We don't even need, elite prime Aaron Rodgers, because we're not going to get elite prime Aaron Rodgers. We just need good enough Aaron Rodgers, which is basically healthy Aaron Rodgers. I've talked about this Jets team. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think this offense is going to bounce back in a big way. They've improved that offensive line. So yeah, definitely Garrett Wilson. If you get to the end of the first round, early second round, and Amon-Ra and Justin Jefferson are gone, I will happily take G. Will.
Definitely agree on that. I think he's shown that he is as quarterback proof as it gets, considering he actually had a decent season with what he had to deal with last year. Now, there are no worries at all about the Eagles offense anymore, I don't think. I know some people don't love taking the number 2 receiver in an offense. I honestly would not be surprised if Devontae Smith winds up being the leading receiver for Philly, and even if he isn't, so what? He's still a stud. I'm going to take him every chance I get, and I know you will too.
Yes, I'm not quite as high on him as that. I'm not ready to proclaim that bold take, but I think Devonta Smith is going to be fantastic this year. I love this Eagles offense with Kellen Moore, the way they're going to use both him and A.J. Brown, pre-snap motion. They're going to get Devonta Smith into the slot way more. I really think we're going to see the best season ever from Devonta Smith, and you can routinely get him 3rd, 4th, round of fantasy drafts on a lot of sites, so not quite as high on him as you seem to be, but still very, very high on him.
All right, but I know we're both high on a guy who seems to be getting overlooked. Look, Chris Godwin didn't have his best season last year, but we've said over and over again, it's going to get better. Chris, I know you feel like you talk about Chris Godwin all the time, but there's a reason for it.
Yeah, and another guy who's going to see his usage totally change this year. This is a guy who was predominantly a 50+% snap guy out of the slot, and then last year that dropped down to 30%. We're going to see that number go way back over 50% again this year, and that's going to be great for Chris Godwin's value. And again, when you look at him versus his teammate Mike Evans, you could typically get him 3-4 rounds after Mike Evans, and like you said with Devonta Smith, it wouldn't surprise me if Chris Godwin outscored Mike Evans this year.
Oh, that's definitely doable. The thing is, this is pretty much still a 1-2 punch in that offense because looks like the number 3 receiver right now is going to be a rookie in Jalen McMillan, and they don't have a tight end who's a true pass catching threat, at least nobody who's going to threaten Evans or Godwin. So I think he's just going to rack up more targets than ever this year. And then finally, I feel like we've been talking Deontay Johnson since March. We probably have. Go back and check. Deontay Johnson to the Panthers. Guys, this is a good thing. It's a very good thing. He will be a verifiable target hog.
Yes, he will be in this offense. And, we've gotten some comments on our videos where we talk about Deontay Johnson, like, hey, look at the history of bottom 5 offenses and their wide receiver ones or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's fair if you assume that the Panthers are going to once again be a bottom 5 offense, which I don't think they will be. I think Dave Canales can save this offense. He saved the Seahawks with Geno Smith. He saved the Bucs last year with Baker. You're telling me he can't do the same thing with Bryce Young? Deontay Johnson going to be a target monster in a surprisingly good offense this year, and he's an absolute steal in fantasy drafts. Do you want to win your fantasy league but don't have time to do all the research? Are you tired of drafting mediocre teams and then having to constantly hope you hit it big on the waiver wire just to compete? Do you wish you could have a fantasy expert like Pierre or myself with you while you draft? Well, now you can. With our app Draft Lane and our live draft pilot, we will guide you through every pick of your draft and tell you exactly which players we would pick if we were on the clock. Our proprietary algorithm will take into account your league settings, scoring, and roster requirements to identify the best picks every time you are on the clock to ensure you have a winning team from week 1. It's the closest thing you can get to having us there drafting with you. Get the biggest edge in fantasy football. Just go to your app store and search for Draft Lane and download it today and get ready to dominate your draft.
All right, now we don't always agree, so let's talk about a couple of players that we each think are must-haves. The other one might not feel the same way. So, Chris, you have a rookie in mind who, I don't know, I don't think he's going to be the top target, maybe not even the second target on his team. Why do you like him?
I like Rome Odunze more and more as the preseason goes on. Obviously, this was one of my favorite wide receiver prospects if you watched us back before the NFL draft. Then when he went to Chicago, I was like, well, I got to kind of be out on Rome Odunze now because you got DJ Moore there. Obviously, he's going to be the number 1. And then you got Keenan Allen there. And I was, like, okay, where is he going to fit into this offense? But watching this preseason, I really think he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver over Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen does not look good. And look, there's some reports that he's weighing 265 pounds. I don't know if that's true, but he's playing like a guy who weighs 265 pounds right now. Does not look good at all. We got to remember, this guy is well over 30 years old, at least well over by NFL years. Maybe he's lost a little bit of his step coming off an injury last year. Rome Odunze has looked good in the preseason. I know he made that mistake in the back of the end zone in the second preseason game, but look, he's going to learn from it. He's a rookie. It would not shock me one bit if he is actually the number 2 wide receiver in this Bears passing attack. And Caleb Williams has looked all the part of that guy. They've bolstered the offensive line. I love this Bears passing attack. I want a piece of it. And if Rome Odunze is going to be the number 2 wide receiver like I think he will, you're going to want Rome Odunze on your fantasy team. And he goes so late. He's the last Bear wide receiver picked, but he's the one I probably want the most because as much as I like DJ Moore, his price is kind of expensive. Rome Odunze is the Bear wide receiver that you can get at a value that I think has a ton of upside.
Well, I'm big on this Bears offense because I just called Caleb Williams a league winner in one of our other videos. And look, the talent is undeniable. I don't know. I think the reports of Keenan Allen's demise have been greatly exaggerated because he just looked good in one of their preseason showings and caught 3 touchdowns on one, training camp exhibition, whatever they do. I mean, come on. Do you really think Odunze is going to get enough targets that he's going to be fantasy viable on a weekly basis? Because they seem to have a lot of weapons even besides DJ Moore and Keenan Allen.
I do. I think we're going to see Odunze, maybe not week 1, maybe not right out of the gate. Maybe he's not going to be, right away a fantasy stud for your team. But look, Justin Jefferson, remember his rookie year, he didn't really do anything in the first couple of weeks, and then look how he finished. I don't see why Rome Odunze couldn't do the same thing. I really do think by season's end, Rome Odunze will take over and be the number 2 target in this offense.
All right, well, this may sound almost hypocritical, but let me talk about a receiver who's going to be one of 3 that are going to be part of the same offense. He's the last one drafted, and that's why I'm now in on Tank Dell. Like, I haven't been on Tank Dell really until now because I had the same concerns everyone else did, right? Where are the targets going to go, right? Nico Collins, now Stephon Diggs. There's only so much to go around. Of course, Tank Dell being the smaller guy. He got injured last year, could get injured again. But look, here's the thing. This Houston offense is going to be prolific. We don't have to wonder how CJ Stroud might do. We've seen it, okay? Caleb Williams, I'm not worried, but we still haven't seen it. We've seen it with Stroud. He's just going to get better in year 2. And Tank Dell, unlike Rome Odunze, is not a rookie. He already got that rookie season out of his way, and he was looking really good. You remember, before that injury, he had scored 5 touchdowns over the previous 4 games. A touchdown in every game. He was just becoming a touchdown machine, believe it or not. Now, I understand that now there's a lot more competition for targets, but I don't think it really matters. This team is going to spread it out. There's going to be plenty to go around. And honestly, CJ Stroud has that chemistry with Tank Dell. He showed it last year. That's why they drafted him. He's his go-to guy. He doesn't have that yet with Diggs, and we don't even know for sure if Diggs is washed or not because he did seem to lose a little bit of a step last year. I like the fact I can get a guy who's a legit stud, who makes those big plays, 15 yards per reception, and I can get him right now ADP of 66. Yeah, I'll take that. So I'm now firmly in on Tank Dell. I still think, just for the record, that Nico Collins will lead this team in receiving. That's what I'm projecting. But you have to draft Nico inside the top 30. You have to draft Diggs inside the top 40. I can get Tank Dell a couple of rounds later, and that's why I'm doing it as much as possible.
Look, I agree with you, Tank Dell. I like Tank Dell, but aren't you a little worried that the fact that he's competing with these other guys, and he did have a lot of his fantasy value last year from touchdowns, that he's going to be too volatile for a redraft type of league?
Look, volatility is definitely going to happen, right? There's no way the Texans are going to go off every single week, and that's why I know we both feel CJ Stroud is being a little overdrafted, but volatility is fine because I would rather have those boom weeks, those spikes, than just somebody who's just kind of flatlined every week. All right, looks like you got another rookie receiver in mind.
Yeah, I'm coming around on these rookies. Maybe I'm falling for the preseason hype, but I'm starting to really come around on Brian Thomas Jr. This was another guy wasn't really into once he went to Jacksonville too much because I thought, what's his role going to be? You got Christian Kirk, you got Evan Ingram, you got Gabe Davis there, but I'm liking the role I'm seeing from Brian Thomas Jr. so far in preseason. I'm also liking the fact that he's starting to really get some positive buzz the last, couple of weeks here. I think Gabe Davis is going to be in that sacrificial X role. And what I mean by that is he's going to be the guy, they're going to line him up in that X wide receiver spot on the outside, on the line of scrimmage. And they're just going to say run deep. And look, every now and then, Gabe Davis will somehow get behind the defense and score a long touchdown. But he's really just going to be there to take the top off the defense. That's going to open things up for Brian Thomas Jr. underneath. This is a guy, they're going to be able to line him up all over the field. He can play the slot when they're out there in 2 wide receiver sets. He can play outside when it's 3 wide receiver sets. And this is a guy who was one of the best vertical wide receivers in college last year, which I think is actually a good match for Trevor Lawrence. Even though Trevor Lawrence hasn't quite lived up to expectations, he's a guy that will take shots down the field. He's not afraid to gunsling it. And Brian Thomas can also run other good base routes like slants and curls. So it's not like he's just a one-trick pony downfield type of guy. So I'm really coming around on Brian Thomas Jr. this year being potentially the number 1 or maybe the 1B wide receiver in this offense. And he's a guy on most sites going outside the top 100 picks, outside the top 50 wide receivers. I think he's well worth a gamble in your fantasy drafts.
Well, I know you don't have to draft him early. Look, the talent is undeniable. I mean, this guy could be a legit stud, but my worry is that he will be a one-trick pony, that he'll be used the same way that Calvin Ridley was misused last year, that he's just going to be like a glorified Gabe Davis and just do those deep shots. My concern is just this Jacksonville offense. I mean, they were so bad in the second half last year. You really think Trevor Lawrence is legit and they can turn this thing around?
Well, that's a great question and totally fair points, but I think Gabe Davis is going to be in that Calvin Ridley, just stand out there, get pressed to death, and run straight role. So that's one reason why I like Brian Thomas more than I did earlier. But to your second point about the Jags offense and Trevor Lawrence, certainly that's a great question. I'm going to bet on Trevor Lawrence at some point becoming the guy we expected him to be. And if it's this year, you're going to be glad you had Brian Thomas Jr. So certainly a fair question there, but I'm betting on Trevor Lawrence being that guy eventually, hopefully in 2024.
Well, that leads us right into my next must-have receiver. Again, a player I'm just now finally coming around on, and it's Calvin Ridley. Now, I was not in on Calvin Ridley, if you remember last year, and it's not like I was that, worried about Jacksonville's offense in general. Although I am now, which you clearly know if you've heard me talk about Brian Thomas and other players in that offense. Calvin Ridley was really good, honestly, I think in spite of Trevor Lawrence and offensive coordinator Press Taylor. He was really, really effective. Those of you who know reception perception, Matt Harmon, we're big fans. Look, Calvin Ridley was successful on basically every type of route he ran last year, just full of green on his chart. And the problem is he didn't have enough diversity in his route tree. Too many times he was asked to run that 9 and just go deep, or just running a simple curl. He can do so much more. He was lined up outside on the line of scrimmage 82% of the time. This is not a very creative offense. There's not a lot of pre-snap movement. They didn't put him in the slot. They didn't do much of anything other than the same old thing over and over again. Look, maybe that explains some of Trevor Lawrence's struggles late last year. But look, Ridley, I know you're thinking from Jacksonville, which is a team that does score points sometimes. Going to Tennessee, I mean, everybody just assumes immediate downgrade. But I'm looking at the play caller, the play calling, and as much as I am not yet totally convinced that Will Levis is going to be as good as Trevor Lawrence, I'm not that far off than most people, because I think Will Levis is going to be good enough. And I really don't think Trevor Lawrence is that good, to be honest. I think he's now officially the most overpaid quarterback in the league. But look, I'm in on this Tennessee offense, and Calvin Ridley will be the one there. DeAndre Hopkins already banged up. I think Ridley will start to finally pay off on where he's being drafted, because last year you had to draft him like round 3 or 4. Now you can draft him like round 6 or 7. So I'm taking him, and I'm taking that upside every time.
Yeah, I certainly think Ridley is a better value this year. I'll be honest, I've been having trouble pulling the trigger on him a lot of times in our underdog drafts. You really think Will Levis can support Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins whenever he's back, maybe Treylon Burks, 2 pass-catching running backs, enough for Calvin Ridley to be, I guess, maybe not a stud, but like a very good fantasy wide receiver?
I do, because, like I said, Hopkins, I know he's not out long, but he's already missing some preseason. And Treylon Burks, I mean, I think we can just agree. Like, I used to be the biggest Treylon Burks truther. I'm off of that. I think we can agree he's not a threat, all right? I think Will Levis showed me enough last year. I believe he takes a big step forward, but at least big enough that, look, I think he can be at least as good as Trevor Lawrence was. So, not too worried. Look, Ridley's such a good receiver. He will make Will Levis look good. So now you know some of the receivers we keep drafting over and over again. Those are our must-haves. But which of those, if any, has the upside to be the wide receiver 1? We talked about a couple, but there's some more that might surprise you. Check it out.